Good morning. Hope you're off to a great Tuesday so far. You know, it's not every week that you have these sort of passing, flippant references to the potential of World War III. And you certainly don't have that often when we're about 10 days away from the Olympics, which is supposed to be the world coming together in this healthy competition. So let's just take a little moment to talk about this and talk specifically about NATO, because there's so many references as well to NATO in the news, and no one's really slowing down to talk a little bit about why NATO was even created and how it's a factor in the news cycle that we're in right now. So let's go back to that. What is NATO? NATO is the largest military alliance in the entire world, the largest military peacetime alliance in the entire world. You know, in the past, when you talk about alliances, especially military alliances, oftentimes they were formed during wartime. And NATO really is a byproduct of the world emerging from World War II and countering a surging Soviet Union. So NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It now has 30 members, 30 countries: the United States, Canada, most of Western Europe, and Turkey. Turkey is a little bit of a variable in NATO. We'll talk about that in a moment. But NATO alliances are built upon shared values, these countries sharing values, and a very simple concept of collective defense. If you get in a fight, I got your back. That's why you saw NATO countries support the United States in Afghanistan and Iraq after 9/11. And when we talk about NATO in the news, sometimes that also adds to some of the confusion, because you may hear the term, NATO soldiers, or NATO soldiers were attacked, or NATO soldiers died. And that sort of seems to reference that there's some sort of standing army for NATO. But that's not the case. When we're talking about people dying that are NATO service members, these are Polish soldiers and British soldiers and German soldiers that were fighting on our behalf for the goal that the United States put out there, because the United States was attacked on 9/11. And when someone is attacked in NATO, you have the other countries follow. But remember that basic part of the creation of NATO. There's different ways to read it. If you read about it on the State Department website for the United States State Department, and you read about it on NATO's website, it looks a little different about why and how NATO was created. But again, happened after World War II, as the world was trying to navigate, how do we make sure something like this doesn't actually happen again? And then as Western Europe was really trying to rebuild, you had the Soviet Union surging and a question about communism spreading. And Europe and the United States didn't want to see that. So when Russia is concerned about NATO, remember that the origins of NATO really have to do countering the former Soviet Union. It's in place in part because of Russia. And Russia knows this. Take a look at the recent member nations of NATO. They include Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland. And you can see that these countries really border a former Soviet state, not only Russia's western border, but the former Soviet state of Belarus. Ukraine was a former Soviet state as well. And remember, NATO isn't just about, groups of countries coming together and unifying over shared values and having philosophical conversations. As a military alliance, this is about strategy. And getting these NATO nations that are closer to Russia is key for member nations like the United States. Russia feels that pressure, because that means that the military alliance is moving closer to the border. Russia doesn't like that. And that's one of the issues when it comes to Ukraine. Ukraine is not a member nation of NATO. In fact, in recent history, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union and had very close relationships with Russia. That's changed in recent years, and Ukraine has made a move to sort of court the West, and the West has sort of tried to court Ukraine because, again, of the strategic position. Ukraine is a block between Russia and the rest of Europe, and really having Ukraine potentially part of NATO would bring NATO right up into the backyard, not even the backyard, the front yard of Russia. And this is where there's really a conflict. Just a note on this. This is why I wanted to mention Turkey. There's been questions over the years about a series of different countries and whether or not we actually all share the same values in NATO. This has come up related to Turkey in part because of their close relationship with Russia. And we're seeing, when we're watching who's actually going to support Russia, if push comes to shove, NATO nations are supposed to be united. And there's sometimes this lingering question about Turkey. and their relationship with Russia. So it's just something to watch as we see the news develop. In the meantime, let's get to what the Pentagon said yesterday. We're basically activating troops to get them in a higher posture of readiness if they need to deploy on behalf of NATO. But let's take a look at the numbers. The Pentagon said upwards of 8,500 troops potentially at this heightened posture. But according to reports, Russia has more than 100,000 troops along the border of Ukraine. And so pay close attention to these numbers. Yes, NATO will have a readiness force of some sort with tens of thousands of soldiers. But we've never seen NATO activate in some sort of land conflict or land war in Europe. We've never seen that. It's important we're trying to figure it out on Smarter News. Like, how does this happen? And then we realize, oh, we've actually never seen it actually happen in the way that some are anticipating that it could. This story can go a lot of different directions. And that's why this hyperbole about World War III, like we want to mention that you're probably hearing it. We also want to cover what's in front of us as we're getting information. So right now, it looks like those leaders in Ukraine are starting to try to calm tempers. We're watching NATO coalesce and talk about teamwork and shared values. You have Russia and the United States battling, accusing each other of misinformation. And so mixed into all of this is a lot of chaos. Why is even the conversation about World War III coming up? You're starting to see countries align. We have this official NATO alliance, but you are also watching the United States have military drills with Japan, for example. As we talked about yesterday, Russia is holding these talks, military drills with China and Iran. Is that all just happening by chance? No, the timing matters because countries are trying to show who their friends are. And it kind of gets basic like that. That's what's happening. And so you're seeing these two sort of blocks form. And that's why it's raising the antenna about a broader conflict. So hope this is helpful for you. We have more on NATO and its backstory on our website today. We also have a little bit more information. I want to mention this real quick, just back here at home. We have a couple big stories percolating, including we have new numbers when it comes to the U.S. southern border. So we're going to be looking at that today. Just want to give you a heads up on that. And also, we didn't get to this, but over the last couple of days, there was an important ruling when it came to the federal vaccine mandate. This is the federal government, the Biden administration saying federal workers and contractors have to be vaccinated for COVID-19. A federal judge said that couldn't stand that. It was too much of an overreach by the federal government. The federal government can't appeal that, but that is two legal rulings that are really against these federal mandates that have been put into place or attempted to be put into place by the Biden administration. That included a vaccination requirement or testing for companies of 100 or people or larger, and now also this federal vaccine mandate. So we're going to watch how that develops as well. I don't want to lose sight of that. I know that's important. An important story to watch. So a lot of news out there. Thanks for sticking with us. More on our website on smarternews.com. And questions and comments, as always, let me know. Have a great day.